Hey, this is attorney Paul DeLaury with the Sudden Wealth Podcast, where we talk about how families and business owners can protect their assets and empower their children to be responsible stewards of their wealth. The co-host is Michael Zalno. Thanks for joining us here on the podcast. So today we're talking to Cindy Arledge, who's the author of 4 best-selling books, The Curse of Inheritance, Cracking the Inheritance Code, The Legacy Family Way, and My Camino, My Life. And actually, Cindy, I'm curious the most about the last one, but let me just keep introducing Cindy here. So Cindy teaches that legacy planning is the secret to keeping your wealth in the family. And she believes that the best way to help people is by working with them where they are to discover and implement a plan to quickly impact their lives now and secure their family's long-term future. So lean forward and listen carefully because what you're about to learn could have a significant impact on your family's future success. Okay, hello, Cindy.
Hey, thank you for having me here. It's so great to be with you.
Oh, absolutely. And good morning, Michael.
Good morning. So, Cindy, I'm kind of curious. How did you get involved in legacy planning?
Well, that's a great question, Michael. And it's not one that I ever expected to do. We were an entrepreneurial family, and my parents thought that they had done everything that they needed to do to have their estate plan settled. We were a typical entrepreneur family that we knew we had some family dynamics. And, my dad did try to prepare me for that. But unfortunately, my parents passed away within 8 months of each other. And, that's always a heartbreaking thing, but even more heartbreaking, and one I was unprepared for, was really the dissolution of our family. And sadly, some relationships almost 2 decades later stay broken. But what that did is it made me figure out what can I do differently for my children and my grandchildren. And that's when I discovered legacy planning and really have made it my passion and mission to help other families avoid the pain that we went through.
You mentioned the dissolution, just a quick follow-up. In retrospect, do you think there's something that could have been done to help make that not happen?
Oh, absolutely. And that's what I help other families do. I feel like that what we went through was preventable.
Okay.
So spell it out. When you say dissolution, like what do you mean? Like just people not talking to each other?
Well, it was so bad that we couldn't meet in the same room with all of us having our own attorneys present. We had an attorney for the estate. One brother had his attorney, and I had my attorney. And that was the co-executors working together to settle the estate. Lawsuits were filed, and fast forward 20 years later, almost 20 years later, entire branches of the family are cut off from each other.
Oh, wow. So you still haven't resolved it.
Not with, it takes 2 to tango. And when one person decides that they're done, they're done. And, but there's a gift in that as well, because for me, I'm the one that, that brother's decided that, I don't exist anymore. And the lesson that he's taught me, though, is that I can still love someone who doesn't love me back. So there's a gift in that.
Curiosity question, has that bled into the cousins?
Absolutely. My children were not invited to the wedding. And even sadly, one of my nieces passed away, and we weren't even directly informed that our own niece had passed away. It's a true tragedy for families to have to experience.
How do you prevent it?
Well, and so what's fascinating for me is that legacy planning has existed for a long time. It just doesn't have a name. And so that's why my mission and passion is to see this become a recognized industry, that families can recognize that they need an attorney to do their estate planning. They need a CPA to do their tax planning. They need a wealth advisor to create their wealth, and they need a legacy planner to prepare their family.
So I've been talking with people without naming names. I've been talking with people, and I tend to go round in circles about this, and uh, trying to explain what legacy planning is as opposed to doing a will or a trust. And they keep coming up with, well, what kind of a trust do you need? So, so tell us what you mean by legacy planning.
Well, and that's why I feel I'm different from anybody else that you ever meet, because most people in my industry I have found are an attorney that have bolted it onto their, their practice, or a financial advisor that's bolted it onto their practice. And I see this as a true industry. When I introduce myself to people, it's like oftentimes I have to name what I'm not to get to what I am, because it's such a new concept. But basically, if you think about it, a business never runs out of money because they have a perpetual way. A good business, a successful business never runs out of money. And they have systems and structures to keep the business running that are not dependent on a single person. And so what I discovered in my research is that the successful families that are able to maintain wealth for 100 years or longer actually do similar practices that a business does. They have systems and structure, and to understand what the true cause of wealth transfer failure is to be able to backtrack into a solution. So just a quick analysis of one of the problems is the wealth creator, my mom and dad. My dad made most of the decisions, but at times him and mom would make it together. Had he thought ahead and had access to legacy planning, he would have realized that he had 4 children that needed to form a partnership to keep the wealth intact. But instead, they relied strictly on legal documents that split everything up. And he did, most people don't understand that if your estate is big enough, you've brought in the IRS as your partner until they accept what they want to collect from you. And so for us, that was a 2.5-year holding period. And so, and most people don't understand that after the second person passes away in a state like my mom and dad's, the money that you owe the IRS is due within 9 months. Right? And then you wait around and hope that they accept your check. Well, for us, that was a $1.8 million check. And so we were stuck in a 2.5-year holding period, waiting to see if the IRS would accept it, which they did. And then we were able to settle the estate. So understanding that leaving 4 children and teaching them how to be a partnership, to have managed that money, and how to make decisions and how to protect it and grow it. And then the critical piece, and this is where most families fail, is in the 3rd generation, you've got to create a cousin consortium to teach them how to make decisions, teach them how to protect the money, teach them how to grow the money. Well, that's one of the things that we do with legacy planning, is we work with the wealth creator and we plan that out now and then let them start practicing those skills while there's still time to adjust.
I have a quick comment. Paul mentioned trust, and what kind of trust do you need? I mean, my answer would be you need to trust each other. That's the kind of trust you need.
Well, that is definitely a critical piece to that, Michael. And trust doesn't come naturally to families. And so I've got a quote on my website that families that play together stay together. And most people will maybe take the family on vacation, but not with the intention of building communication and trust, because they're not having the intentional conversations. Lasting wealth doesn't happen by accident. And it's time to take our planning to a whole new level. And so that's what I want to see families do.
So what are the reasons that families lose money over generations?
Well, Michael just mentioned one of them, and it's the lack of communication and trust. I study a lot of brain science, and again, I bring a different perspective to this legacy planning. I use cutting edge brain technology, psychology, and even we talk about spiritual, we talk about, because we are spiritual beings in a physical world. And so to ignore those aspects of our humanness is to miss the boat on creating this solution, right? And so what's fascinating, that we've got different pieces of our brain that do different activities. And when we lose somebody, oftentimes the family members that are left revert back to childhood. And they go back to those roles that they played as children. And so you basically have infants who became orphans trying to settle the estate that have those stories like, you were always dad's favorite and mom always gave the best to you. That's who's settling your estate.
Right.
Unless you can build that communication and trust and have really a conflict resolution plan established before you need it. The second aspect is that families think that they have a great culture, but they haven't actually written it out like a mission statement, like a business. And so you wouldn't think that you have to tell your children not to sue each other and get them to agree to it, but you really do. And so you have to build that culture of we over me. And then the third piece of it is actually to prepare heirs on how to be successful without the parents in their life. Because as human beings, we get a lot of who am I as a person is determined by how our parents have helped us perceive ourselves. And then when that is lost, a lot of adult children are rudderless of like, who am I now? So to prepare heirs in a tactical and a practical way too. I will tell you from my dad, he didn't follow his attorney's advice on setting up his trust because he had control issues. And so he warned me, he said, I know I'm creating a big tax, disadvantage for you. And I remember I'm the youngest, I've got 3 older brothers. And I remember thinking, well, this is your money, Dad. And if you want to spend it in paying taxes when you die, that's your right. Who was I to argue with that? What I failed to take into account is that I was going to have to co-sign the check and make sure it didn't bounce. So he tried to prepare me. I just didn't understand.
Oh, interesting.
You bring up the point of preparation and education, and it seems that I know that, again, Paul mentioned talking to people, there's a certain amount of a need to educate people. By people, I'm not just talking about the families, but also the professionals they're working with. And so that's something I see. So.
Well, and that's why I really am so thrilled Paul is doing what he's doing and helping spread the word. Because the more people that find out that this is an option, and it's really the option that changes everything. You guys know we're in the largest wealth transfer that's ever occurred in the history of mankind. But then the other half of that sentence is that 70% of families implode like mine did on the first wealth transfer. So you've got all these young people going, yay, grandma, grandpa, or whoever's going to pass away, we got all this money coming, not recognizing that it could actually be the economic crisis that could destroy their family.
Right. I tell the story, and I think I've told this on other episodes, but what the heck. When people talk about the difference between legacy planning and estate planning, I give my egg analogy. And imagine that you want to get a dozen eggs. So you drive to the grocery store, you put the dozen eggs in the cart, you check out, you put them all in the flimsy plastic bag. You carry the flimsy plastic bag to the car. Everything's perfect. Everything's fine. You drive home. Eggs are still safe. They don't break. You get the flimsy plastic bag out of the car. And just as you start to enter the house, or actually just as you get into the house, the bag breaks and all the eggs crack. Mm-hmm. From an estate plan standpoint, that's considered like the gold standard. You just did it. You passed the wealth to the next generation. However, you don't have the eggs. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of how I explain people. And I don't know, it sometimes it sticks, or sometimes they kind of.
Well, and my analogy is like learning to drive, right? Okay. So just because you have a driver's license doesn't make you a good driver. Right? That takes experience. And so I kind of feel that the estate plan and the will, you need all that legal structure. It's critical for protecting your wealth and your family. And yet, because they never learned how to drive, they're running into things and having crashes. Where legacy planning, so I'll just share our family is in our 8th year of legacy planning. Okay. And we're a blended family. I have 3 daughters that range between 36 and 38, just because that's, the way they landed. And then we have 5 grandchildren. And it took us a while, because we are a blended family, to recognize that my stepdaughter doesn't want to be in business permanently with my children, because we're heavy into real estate. And so rather than stay on the estate plan that we had, that would have had them and all their descendants being in business together, we had the adult conversation and said, hey, do you guys want us to split this up where you can go your separate ways? It's not about trying to write somebody out of a will. It's about recognizing the reality of the relationships and the strength of those relationships and saying, hey, this isn't going to work. And we're just going to make you miserable if we tie you together forever. And so that's the gift of legacy planning.
Yeah. It's kind of an etiquette. Like it's just being nice to the next generation. Not leaving a mess.
Exactly, it is. And I don't know, there's a death etiquette. A friend of mine, John Braddock, who's the CEO of My Life and Wishes, wrote a book, and he talks about death etiquette. And there is a death etiquette of not leaving behind a mess, for sure.
Sure. I think you mentioned in previous communication something about family harmony creating wealth. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so it's interesting. There's all different kinds of capital account. You've heard about spiritual capital, intellectual capital, financial capital. Well, one of the things that I've come to realize is that there's a family capital, and it's the wealth that you create through the family getting along. Mm-hmm. And I can give you an example of that in our family, right? We spent $100,000 on attorney's fees to sit in the same room for a year. There were additional attorney fees because of the lawsuit. There was, if we had had more family harmony, I feel like my dad would have been able to fund the trust instead of, feeling like he was going to lose control. We could have possibly saved $1.8 million in taxes. So the interesting thing about family capital and this wealth that you create, you really can't measure it till you lose it.
Right.
Right. And so what we get families to do is we actually have them invest in the family harmony while you're alive. And the ROI may never be able to be determined, because how would you know what you saved? It's just an interesting concept. And so, for us, our family harmony, my husband and I invest $10,000 to $15,000 a year on annual trips with our family and family meetings, and we meet on a regular basis. But, let's say, 10 years from now, that's $150,000. I'd spend $150,000 to save 1.8 million any day.
For sure.
Right?
For sure.
And so there's actually wealth that you create by having that culture of we over me. But again, it doesn't happen by accident.
That's well said. Go ahead, Michael.
Yeah, you mentioned the 1.8 million in taxes, but look at all the attorney fees you and your siblings wound up spending. So we may be talking even more. And then there's the psychological cost of getting into those battles. So
and wealth is more than money. And so to your point, Michael, the wealth that we lost by having entire branches of our tree cut off. Like my brothers never met any of my grandkids. And so it's more than money, that this harmony creates true wealth and goes even further into, like, I would even say, well-being.
Yeah. I have another question. What are crucial conversations that adult children can initiate with their parents to protect their future?
Well, one of the interesting things that I've discovered in the legacy planning that I do with families, anytime you make your children be in a guessing game about what your wishes would be, you've left them in a position of being in opposition or having a discord. So a great example is that it happened to a friend of mine. He went in for a simple surgery and things didn't go well and ended up with, I think they call it emergency room psychosis, and woke up in a different decade. And so his adult children were guessing and making life and death decisions for dad, while he had a live-in common law girlfriend who claimed to have financial power of attorney. And so and dad couldn't remember what passwords, nobody could pay the bills. It cost him an extra $80,000. And that goes back to that wealth, right? So the crucial conversation that an adult can have is to realize that if your parents are still alive and you don't know what their last wishes are, you're going to be left guessing, and people may not agree. And then, do they have a will? Who's going to take care of the dog? Where are their passwords? There's so many crucial conversations that as a society, we are uncomfortable in having, right? I do a little stand-up comedy to keep my speaking skills current. It's like, if you want me to clear a room, I can do it like that, because we're going to talk about aging, death, and money. Right.
Sure.
And even my ex-husband a couple of years ago had a stroke, and I watched my two daughters with 5 babies trying to take care of their father, make medical decisions for him, take care of a herd of cattle in a different state and his business. And it's if your adult children, your parents are alive, they could tank your financial plan if they don't have enough wealth or haven't decided what their quality of life could be. So there's a massive conversations that we aren't having that are all crucial.
Well, so Cindy, if people want to find out more about you, where do you want them to go?
Well, the easiest way is just to go to cindyarledge.com. That's kind of like my portal, and it gives information.
Great. Yeah. And we'll have a link to that in the show notes here. So we're going to start something new with our podcast, and we're going to have a question of the week for people. And the question is, speaking of clearing the room, the question is, what crucial conversation with your parents or your adult children have you been putting off? And what has stopped you from starting that conversation? So what you can do is go to the show notes, and we'll have instructions for where you go. There's going to be a link to Twitter, a Twitter account, and you can enter your answer, your response. So again, the question: what crucial conversation with your parents or adult children have you been putting off, and why have you not been having that conversation? So I guess that does it for this episode of the Sudden Wealth Podcast, where families and business owners learn how to protect their assets and empower their children to be responsible stewards of their wealth. For now, all good wishes, and take care, everyone.
Thank you, Paul and Michael.
You're welcome.
That was a good show. That was really good.